It all started when we got a letter from a woman by the name of Kari. It states, I was married in the year 2000 to a man who later ran from the country to hide from financial felonies. Almost 20 years later, I got a message on Facebook from a woman in Canada. She had been married to my ex-husband, who was living under a different name at the time, and had 2 children, which were my children's half-siblings. She then went on to explain the absolute shock she felt when the ICE agents came to arrest him using his real name. We have been best friends ever since. It turns out he has had at least 4 wives that we know of and 7 children with 5 women. Now, after reading that, Amber and I knew that this story was right up our alley, and we had to find out more. So hang on tight, you won't want to miss this one. It has lots of twists and turns along the way, and it's still unfolding.
Welcome to Ex-Wives Undercover.
Liars, cheaters, and love cons.
I'm Amber.
And I'm Athena.
First we told our story, and now we're sharing all of your craziest and most heart-wrenching stories of love gone wrong. Sometimes we laugh.
And sometimes we cry.
But more importantly,
we stand together. All right, girl. You ready to do this?
Let's do it.
The views, information, or opinions expressed on our show by our guests are solely the views of those individuals involved, and by no means represent absolute facts. Opinions expressed by the host and guests may change at any time. Our podcast and YouTube show may at times cover sensitive topics, including but not limited to suicide, abuse, violence. Listener and viewer discretion is advised. Season 5, Episode 1 of Kari's Story, The Fleeing Felon.
So in March of 2000, I was a college student at the University of Alabama. And in high school, when I was 17 years old, I had a little boy. And so I had graduated from high school early and started my college journey. And so I was a very, very young college student, but I was going to school full time and taking care of a little boy. And I had a job part-time at the local bank. And so one day I'm working and this guy comes in and he's cute and he's flirty and he comes in a few days later and he's standing in my line. And every time he comes in, he stands in my line. And finally, after he leaves one day, my branch manager said, hey, like I know him, like he's recently divorced. He's just a really great guy. I think you'd really like him and he would love to ask you out. And he asked if it was okay to ask you out at work. And I told him that would be great because I'd love to set y'all up together. And so after several times asking, I finally agreed to go out with him. You know, it was interesting to me because I had not had a lot of life experience at this point. Even though I had a little boy, I wasn't one in school to go out and party and be wild. And I had not had a lot of the typical college experiences like my friends had had. And I didn't have a ton of friends because I couldn't go and have those experiences. And I think that makes a big difference in, you know, being susceptible to these people.
And he was 10 years older, right?
He was 10 years older than me, and I did know that going in. But when you're working and you have a small child and none of your friends are at the same place that you are in their lives, it seems like your peer group is really people who are older and who do have kids because they're the ones that understand what you can do. They're the ones that say, no, I can't go out because I have to watch the baby or I have to take care of the kids, or can we go to family friendly events? Whereas my kids my age, or the students that were my age, they were not interested in any family friendly events. If there was not alcohol, what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why it wasn't necessarily that it was so appealing, but I think that was a better fit in my mind. I had a family member who made a comment to me one time that was very much well, now that you have a kid, nobody your age is ever going to hang out with you, or you're not going to find someone that is really your age anyway, because they're out having fun and you can't do those things. Even though that was kind of an offhanded remark at the time, things like that really stick, and people don't realize that the impact that their words have.
With him being cute and, this handsome guy who's successful, that probably was appealing, like someone that's stable, that is mentally ready to be a parent and could take care of you and provide for the family. I'm sure that was not a bad thing.
Absolutely. And, from the lady that worked with me at the bank, she said, look, he is recently divorced, but he has a little boy. He's 2 years old. My little boy was around the same age at the time. And so in my mind, I thought, well, that's kind of ideal because he knows exactly where I'm at. He does have kids. He must be comfortable with kids, so it's okay.
Yeah. So what was dating like with him? Like what kinds of things, like right off the bat, was it love bombing like we always hear?
It was absolutely a whirlwind because, the first date, it was very much a, love bombing situation. We're going to do all the things for you. And it was every single day. There was something from the day that we first went out. He was involved with something with me every single day. And when I would get to the point where I would say, okay, I have to take some time and study, I have classes still, or I have to work, or I have to, like, for example, there was one night he wanted to go out with his friends, and I said, I really can't. I think my excuse was I have to clean the house. And the next thing I know, there's like a merry maid standing at my front door. Like he's, and he's going to resolve that problem so that, okay, now you don't have an excuse. You can go out. Let's go. Or it was, oh, I don't really have anybody to keep my baby. And he would have a friend of his watch my little boy so that I had no excuse as to why we couldn't go and do.
And it sounds like let me see, your roommate began dating his friend. So you had this nice little close knit group.
We did. So my roommate actually worked with me at the bank at the time. And he brought in one of his friends that he had, I won't say gone to college with him, but they were roommates, not at the time, but had been roommates several years before and remained friends. And so he came down to visit a few times, and my roommate went with me, and they started dating, and they dated for a few months. And it was the same thing. It was, well, they're going out to do something. He's coming down to see her. We're going to get together. We're going to do these things. It was like there was no backing out. There was no slowing down. It was all full steam ahead all the time.
It kind of seems like a fairy tale. I would never guess in a million years that, oh gosh, I'm being love bombed. Who
Mhm. Right. Well,
knew?
you
I just
don't,
thought, oh my God, they really like me.
and I don't think any woman really thinks that at first, but especially as someone, that's really young and doesn't have a lot of experience in the world, 19 years old, you just don't know what's going on. And you don't stop and think, okay, he just bought me a, $1,000 watch. Where did that money come from? Like you just don't stop and think about that's an inappropriate gift for someone that you've only been dating a few months. I don't understand why that, you know, at this
Right.
point now, if somebody did that to me after 2 or 3 months, I'd be like, whoa, that's totally not okay. Get away, big red flag. Um, but at the time, and when you're in it, and we all know that when you're in a situation like that, you absolutely can't see from an outsider's perspective, and you can't see that these things are, wait a minute, this is crazy.
Yeah, it's a train that you can't really get off of.
Fairly early in the relationship, David told Kari about his time living in a boys' home after being removed from his biological mother's care. He was legally adopted as a teenager and even showed her a photo on the day of his adoption at the courthouse.
A few months in is when he started talking about his childhood. I didn't really meet his parents, but I did, and he has adoptive parents, and so those two parents are legit in the community. Mom has a couple of businesses, and I did see those businesses, and I could see that she was the owner of those businesses. It was a few months later when he said, well, I mean, they're not my birth parents. I was raised in a boys' home. until I was a teenager. I was taken away from my mom when I was 5 years old. And then he would tell me stories about, things that happened in the boys' home, but it didn't seem like he had an abusive life to that age. I just felt like he never really knew anything about his birth family or um, had any contact with his birth mother until later. Like I said, I don't think it was a terrible experience or a terrible childhood, but it wasn't the same as being raised by loving parents who really taught you right from wrong. And there's really no telling what happened in those first formative years before he was placed in that home.
David was the life of the party and everybody loved him. When spring break came along, he pulled out all the stops to impress Kari and her friends. And this is also the point where we are beginning to see his possessive and controlling ways discreetly hidden from the casual onlooker.
I had several friends who, I was still friends with some of my high school friends who had come down to the university to go to school, and they were all wanting to get together and let's go to the beach. And my roommate wanted to go, and several other folks wanted to go. And I think he just really couldn't stand the thoughts of me going without him being there. Like, he was already to the point where he couldn't let me go a single day without some kind of contact. And that doesn't seem all that unusual now because we text and we Facebook message and we Snapchat and we do all these things today where we have this instant gratification and this instant contact. But 23 years ago, I didn't have a cell phone. This was coming to see me at work. This was showing up at my home. And you just didn't have that instant gratification, but he really needed, it's almost like he really needed that consistent contact. So I imagine in the era that we're in now, he would be that guy that would text you incessantly just to get the things, just to get that gratification. But he didn't have that technology then to do those things. And so that was one of the first things that he did is went and bought a cell phone for me. And this was back in the day when those Nextel two-way radio phones were popular. And
Nope.
that is, I think that's the equivalent to text me back right now. And so, I would be anywhere and my phone would go beep, beep, and it would be that Nextel two-way radio popping up and, hey, where are you? Hey, can you come by and eat lunch with me? Hey, can you come by? But so when spring break came around and I had friends that were talking about wanting to go to the beach, it was absolutely like, I think you should go, but I think I should go with you because, so you just need someone to take care of you down there. I want you to be able to have fun. But, I think he really just didn't want to be left out of that. He didn't want to lose that control over what I was doing all day, every day. And so he arranged for a huge condo. He went and rented a convertible to drive down to the beach and drive around on the beach. And he wanted to be the center of everyone's attention. Everyone come here and party here. And I mean, that makes it sound really wild. It wasn't wild at all, but he just had to have that control and he wanted to flaunt the money around, I guess, just to show like my friends that he, could do all these things and that he was just going to impress them. But he was also starting to slowly replace my friends with his friends in our lives. And it took me a long time to really see what he was doing there. But he was, if you can ask anybody that knew him superficially, he was really the life of the party. I mean, everyone loved him. He could come into the bar and buy a round for everyone. And before you knew it, he'd picked up a guitar and he was singing songs and he was playing pool and, he could shoot the breeze with anybody and everybody loved him. And so what would be a red flag now, all I could see was people who were just falling all over themselves to hang out with him. And so, I just didn't get to see any of that from that perspective.
What about his ex-wife? What did he say about her? Or did you get to meet her or anything? The son?
I have never met his ex-wife.
So, how did David pay for all these extravagant gifts and everything else? He was a business owner, of course. And it just so happens that he could use his job to potentially monitor his new girlfriend and or find out her social security number and other important financial information.
He said that he owned a business and he sold alarm systems. And I'm not going to name the major company that he fell under the umbrella of, but it's a nationwide, legit company. So I didn't have any reason to think, oh, this guy's a criminal because, a security company that's a nationwide company, he must be okay.
When did he say he was concerned for your safety and decided to put an alarm system? Like, that's weird. That's a
Well,
little, like, what was there a reason to be concerned for your
well,
safety?
I was a young single mom living alone with my little boy until my roommate moved in. But his business was selling alarm systems. And so if you've never had any experience with a business like that, the independent contractor that goes around, that comes door to door selling alarm systems, they get a commission for every system that they sell. And so, really, I think he just needed to sell that month. I also learned after the fact, much later, in fact, years later, that when they sold alarm systems, you would have to sign up for a monitoring service. Like the installing of the system itself is not as big of a deal as selling the long term monitoring service. And they take your social security number, just like they do when you get an internet account or a phone account. They have to get your social security number in order to have you do that contract for a long term monitoring service. And I think part of that was to get more information about me as well. Whether he really intended to, take advantage of me at that point or not, I'm not sure. But later, he had all that information that he needed to do the things later that happened. So I think that's where all of the information that he had to use to buy things, on my credit later, I think that's where it all came from.
Oh my God. Do you think he was spying on you too? Like, did he have access to the monitoring?
I don't know. I mean, this was, like I said, 23 years ago. It's not like I had a camera system. It was really just sensors on the door and things like that. So I don't think he
Okay.
was. But he was with me so much, I don't think he would have had to.
Things were moving full force between Kari and David, and within just a couple of months, he had purchased her a beautiful 1 carat sapphire ring for Mother's Day. He also decided that she needed a new car and brought one home for her on a whim. The lavish gifts were constant, as well as the continual stream of social obligations that inherently took a toll on her grades.
All of this it was just, like I said, a whirlwind. And, I think we started in dating in March of 2000. And by the fall, we were engaged. So again, I was a student when we met, and it was in the spring semester. I didn't take classes over the summer because it was just always something going on. And by the fall, I just didn't register for classes anymore. Like he had exhibited so much control over me, and I without me realizing it, and I let him talk me out of going to school right now, and I let him talk me out of keeping my job. My job was part time and like 20 hours a week. It was not a ton of money, which at the time for me was fine, but he always had some reason, he always had some excuse, and somehow he managed to talk me out of working. So that I could do things for him for his business. It was like, well, I'll give you this money and you can do these things for me. It'll almost be like you're my employee, and so that'll keep you can do things on your schedule. It'll be more flexible. You can spend more time with your kid. And like that was in the summer, so you can, have more time for school. And then by the time it was time to register for classes again, I didn't have time for school right then. And hey, you know what? You just need a break. Take some time for you. Enjoy your child. We're trying to, plan a wedding, and it's just going to be too much this semester. You can wait. It's just one semester. You can go back later. It's not a problem. And then all of a sudden it was just happening.
As mentioned earlier, David was divorced and had a child. Kari was told that his ex had moved out of state to Louisiana, and he hadn't seen his son since she stole him.
I have never met his ex-wife. Um, when I first visited his house, it was half empty. It was clear that she had taken a lot of stuff when she left. His little boy's room was almost empty. There were very few things left. And so it was very clear that she had left him. And so, there was no, well, he's still married or he could still be married. It was apparent what was going on. And, he made a show of writing these big child support checks and sending these big child support checks. Whether they were actually mailed, who knows, you know. But she moved several states away to Louisiana. And that was where she was from originally. And so it wasn't easy for him to see his little boy. And so it was probably a few weeks after we got married before I ever met his little boy. And we had gone down there, he said, to modify something in their agreement, and had gone and picked him up and spent some time with him, went to the park, took him to eat, things like that, and brought him back that same day just so that he could spend some time with him while he was there. And I think that's the only time that I ever remember him having any time with that little boy. He later told me, that she was just going to withhold him, that he was too far away, that she was already dating, and her husband, he later said that her husband had adopted him legally. And I found out later, I believe that that's true, but I believe that that happened so much later than what he indicated to me, because after we were married, he would have me write a check out and just ask me to put it in an envelope for the child support. And so at some point in time, he said, there's no point in sending checks anymore. I'm going to sign over my rights so that her husband can just raise him, because she's never going to allow me to be a parent. And so that was the last I really ever heard about his little boy that lived in Louisiana.
In September of 2000, Kari and David were married. And let's just say Mother Nature was trying her very best to give Kari a sign. Don't do it.
I woke up that morning and there was this huge line of tornadoes from, Alabama to Mississippi. It was going to be happening all night, coming right through the middle of town. There was no break. It was consistent storms all day. And so it was like the universe was saying, please just rethink this. Don't go through with it. Just run away. And of course, stubborn me says, no, we can still do this. None of my family was able to make it because of all the weather. They lived probably an hour away, and so they couldn't make the drive. They couldn't risk that. And I had absolutely no support system there that day. Nobody showed up for me. And that really should have been a pretty major red flag there too. But you attribute it to the weather, and they had a really good excuse as to why they couldn't come. And I mean, really, did they have qualms about it by then? I think they did, and I think nobody said anything.
And it wasn't long before the glaring red flags made themselves more obvious.
I think a lot of the things that I should have seen, or all the red flags, really started after we got married. There was one night that I came outside, and he loved to have a fire pit and have friends over, but there was one night he was outside, and I came outside to see what was going on, and he had one of my photo albums from maybe high school or college, and he was going through and just pulling out photos of any picture that had a guy in it, and putting it, throwing it in the fire. It's like he was trying to erase and I don't know if I can't remember if he had been drinking or what, but he started this fight with me that I was keeping all these pictures of these men because I missed being with them. And it was like, where did this come from? We just got married. If I wanted somebody else, we wouldn't have been married. So what's going on? And I think that's really when it started, I guess it was probably more abusive than I want to admit because he would do things like grab my arms, and grab my wrists. But I was not going to just take it. So I would, and I'd yell back at him, and I didn't have any trouble doing that. And so it was just like it would escalate to the point where he would be grabbing my arm or grabbing my wrist, and he'd leave those little 4 bruises on the back of your arm that when they grab a hold of it. And I still, we're still just learning each other. We didn't date that long. We just figured it out. But a few months after we got married, I got a phone call and at the house because landlines were a thing still, right? And it was this girl, and she said, asked if I was David's wife, and I said yes. And I guess she thought I was his first wife. But she said I had a baby with him while you were married to him. And I said, well, I mean, we just got married like 3 months ago, so I'm not sure that that's possible. And she said, oh, well, are you? And I said, no, I'm not. And so, oh, okay, well, I was going to tell her, but I'll tell you anyway. Your husband, I met him in a bar and I went home with him and I ended up having a baby and he's like 3 months old. And I just felt like somebody should know. And I mean, what do
Oh
you
my
say?
God.
Right?
My mouth would be on the floor like, wait, were you guys together then? Like in the very beginning stages, or was it right before you met?
I guess it was before we met because the age of the child and the length of time that we had been together
Okay.
didn't really fit. Um, so, I mean, and I'm doing this quick math in my head exactly at that time, trying to
Right.
figure out,
I'd be
okay,
shooting
when, how
myself
long
like,
have
oh
we
my
been
God.
together, right?
April, May,
Um,
June. What, like,
you're right.
does that make
And
sense?
so
Oh my God.
calculating, and I'm just saying, well, what is it that you want? You That was really before me. I can't get mad at him going home with somebody from a bar before we met. If he didn't know he had a baby with you, he didn't know, so I can't get mad at him for keeping a secret. So, what is it that you're wanting by calling? Are you trying to get child support? Because if you want child support, I mean, he's going to want visitation or a relationship with the child. And she said, no, I just wanted somebody to know. And she hung up.
Did you tell him that night? And like, how did she get your phone
Right.
number?
Those paper phone books, like they were still a thing. so,
Oh,
so
so anyone could get your phone number.
right, anybody could. And so, I mean, and we did, and of course, it caused a fight. And I wasn't even trying to fight because how do you get angry at someone for something like that when it was before you? But it was automatically perceived as an attack, and it all really turned into a fight, and it went downhill. From there, I guess.
That summer, David's best friend got engaged. You're going to want to take a mental note because the name Brad will come up again later in the story.
About the same time, he had a very, very close friend. And I was very close friends with this guy's girlfriend. And this guy's name was Brad. And so he was going to propose to his girlfriend. And so we were all excited and we would, get everything together so that he could propose. Like we rented a space at the restaurant and we went and bought all the roses and the champagne. And I took her out to buy an outfit for their anniversary dinner, which, was going to be the engagement dinner. And so I really just tell you all this because I want you to know how close we are to his friend Brad, and how involved we were in their lives. I mean, they were around all the time.
It wasn't long before the newlyweds were expecting a child, but when Kari could no longer partake in the festivities, David was anything but supportive.
I found out that I was pregnant. I already had a little boy that was, 3 years old by that time, and it just seemed like a common progression that he was going to have a little brother.
Was he excited? I mean, like how soon from the time this woman called and said, I have a baby too, and then you finding out you were pregnant, like, was the reactions way different? I mean, clearly you're married and it's a whole different situation, so I would assume he'd be excited
You know,
versus like, oh shoot.
the funny thing is he acted like he was thrilled. Like he was that guy that when you are walking around with that big pregnant belly, he would pat on
Yeah.
it, and feel of it and want to
Yeah.
feel the baby kick. And he really did
Yeah.
act like he was excited to be a dad. I really think that in his mind, the concept of being a parent, and having that person that loves you unconditionally, the way that he grew up, I think he has a really strong desire for that
Yeah.
too. And so I think that really fueled his excitement over the baby. About that time, he and his business partner, the newest business partner, had decided to part ways. I didn't find out until many, many years later that business partner thought that he was taking money out of the business. They just kind of mutually agreed that they were going to do something different. And that was fine because he very, very quickly had another friend of his that was going to jump right in and open back up. And they were really gung ho, and they got, an attorney friend of his to write up an LLC. They got a quick office, and they really did their office up pretty fancy. I mean, they put in a bar in their office, which, I mean, now I've seen several offices that, corporate offices that have kitchens and bars and things like that inside. But at the time, I'd never seen an office with a bar. But okay, if that's what you're going to do, that's fine. I was really occupied with all things baby, prepping. And we had just, like I said, we had just moved into that new house. And so, getting the baby's room together and stuff. So I was really busy and not really paying a lot of attention to what he was doing in his business because, he'd always managed it pretty well before. I never had any, red flags to watch out for. There was something about me being pregnant that was once once the initial, I'm excited, I've got to tell people about it, whatever, once that was over, it was almost like a nuisance, right? Because I couldn't go and drink. And if I would go with him and not drink, then I was ready to go at 9 o'clock. And he was not. And so it was almost like I was this rock in his way of having fun, right? And so this is about the time that he started like going out with his friends more, or even if he would say, well, we're going to just hang out after work at the bar that we have in the office. This is when I stopped being invited to go and do things. And so he would go out and drink or go out with his friends or, stay late hours hanging out and partying. Or there was a lot of weekends that he and his friends, or sometimes him by himself, would load up and drive like the 2 hours over the state line to the casinos in Mississippi and spend, all night gambling and drive back the next day. And of course, it would always cause an argument, and he would always win that argument. And he would always, give me money the next day and say, go, and I spent money last night, so it's only fair that you get to go shopping today or do this for the baby. I know you've been eyeing this fancy, expensive crib, so why don't you go ahead and go buy that today? But one of the big, big deals, the big incidents that caused a lot of frustration about that time is our friend Brad that had just gotten engaged. They decided to throw a bachelor party for him, and it started out in that office because they had a bar there and they were just going to hang out. And then it later became, well, I guess I found out later that they had hired a couple of strippers to come. And, at this time, of course, it's still a bachelor party, and that's not terribly unusual, even if it's a little distasteful. But the next day, I went up to the office to either pick something up or drop something off. And it was just such a disaster in there, like, full of beer bottles and alcohol, and it was just a mess. And whatever I needed to grab, I went over to his desk and opened the desk drawer to get it out. And there was like this box of condoms in the desk drawer. And, that could go a lot of ways, right? Did he need those for his normal day-to-day things? Or, his excuse to me was, well, it was just from the bachelor party, right? And the strippers, and it was all the other guys. It was always somebody else's fault, right? It's always something else. But really, we were really on edge after that, because that was one of those moments where I said, okay, things are not going well. Things are not okay. And I was pretty pregnant by this time. Like, I would have been in the wedding if I had been able to have zipped a bridesmaid's dress, but I was past that point, right? Um, but that was a huge point of contention in our relationship. And I think that it really got worse and worse after that. What else is going on that I've missed to this point?
Now it's like this fun, cute girl that I met who went along with everything. Now she's pushing back and they don't like it. And is this when he started calling you worthless and more of the real hard, like just disrespectful and abusive,
He started about that time getting really aggressive and really verbally abusive when he would argue with me. It went from we would have an argument to a full on fight. And this is when he would start with insults and, you're nothing to me. You don't do anything. You don't contribute in any way. Like and, and it's because he wouldn't let me. He wouldn't allow me to go and work, and he wouldn't allow me to do anything. But his fights with me would be very much, I'm out busting my ass trying to make sure that I'm doing all these things, and you don't appreciate me, and you're not helping our situation, and you're causing problems, and it's always blaming me. And he would get more and more verbally aggressive, and then he would start becoming more and more physically aggressive. Little things like pushing, hitting the wall, as he was stomping out the door, standing up in my face and yelling, the arm grabbing, the wrist grabbing. And he would do that even if we were out together, and he would ignore me, and someone else would feel bad that he was ignoring me and come over and speak. When we would get home, he would absolutely lose his mind with that same type of abuse. Well, you were flirting with him. He was talking to you. And it was really just that his friends and friends of friends they would see it, and they would feel bad that he was treating me the way that he was, even in public.
But there was a time that he came in one night, and he had been drinking. And it was probably 2 a.m. or so. And, after so many times of this, if you're not waiting up, you're really irritated when you are woken up in the night for somebody coming in acting belligerent and drunk. And there was one night that he came in like that. And again, I don't know if I started the fight or if he did. I don't know that it matters. But it escalated to the point where he came in and picked me up by the throat and was screaming in my face, and was holding me up against the wall. And he punched through the wall beside my face. And it scared me to death. And then he just was so outdone, he just kind of threw me over to the side. And by 5 o'clock that morning, I was in labor.
Next time on Ex-Wives Undercover.
My son was born about 24 hours after that. We spent about a week in the NICU, and David was there when he was born. But after, he was going to go home so that he could sleep and get some rest, and then bring back whatever I needed the next day. He didn't show up the next day until late in the night. And when he got there, he was so drunk and smelled so strongly of weed that the nurses in the NICU wouldn't allow him to come in. And it wasn't very long after that when the Tuscaloosa Police Department detective called me. They had a lot of questions about social security numbers and identity, and they had a lot of questions about how the business was run. And they had a lot of questions that they asked me about if I'd ever seen him doing illegal drugs. It turns out that he would find out a lot of information about someone by running that initial credit check to do their contract for their business. He warned me, this is not okay. Like, you need to get out. Probably within a week, I packed up my things while David was gone, and I was afraid of what he would do. I could totally see him being capable of, anything that they had alluded to, and it didn't shock me. And I think that is what scared me the worst.
And once again, if you like what you're hearing, please leave us a 5-star review and make sure to join our private Facebook group for even more juicy info. You can also find us on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. And of course, you can always visit our site at www.xwivesundercover.com.